because Jesus Christ has told me so.
Welcome back to the Westminster Podcast. This is Brandon McLean Smith, and our guest today is the Executive Director of Thank God for Bitcoin, Jordan Bush. Jordan, thanks for joining us.
Brandon, great to be here.
Awesome. So tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, how you became a Christian, how you became Reformed.
Yeah. So again, by the grace of God, I grew up in a Christian family. My mom and dad, my mom was a barely second generation believer. Her parents became Christians a few years before she did. Or before she was born. And then my dad was a first generation believer who was led to the Lord as a result of his sister bringing him to church. This very small, I refer to them as dirt road Baptist churches in Northeast Pennsylvania. So not too far from where you're at. So he grew up there, and again, just through the faithful efforts of specifically men in this church, they would pick him up from his very dysfunctional home as a little kid, take him to church, and just discipled him. And so he grew up. I think he started going when he was 5 or 6 years old, and so grew up and just came to know the Lord and ended up wanting to serve him. And so he's worked with my parents. I've worked for a Christian nonprofit organization for my entire life. So grateful for that. So I grew up going to church every Sunday. We were constantly inundated with the scriptures. And I made a profession of faith when I was a little kid. Just was by myself. Wasn't manipulated by some sort of altar call or something like that. I was by myself in my room and was just thinking about the reality of hell and the reality of my sin. And so it was incomplete, but still a perfectly adequate reason to flee from hell and run into the arms of Jesus. And started growing, loved the scriptures, loved to read and memorize scriptures, and then got into kind of the traditional, I would say, sadly, evangelical story of got into middle high school, was in a public school. Didn't have very many friends who were Christians, and even the ones who weren't exactly, they were kind of on their own struggle journey of, trying to figure out what does it look like to be a Christian when most other people aren't. And so it just led to compromise and led to just wanting to be normal and accepted. And so I always tell people that for those, from 8th grade through I guess 11th grade, basketball became my true God. I worshiped at the altar for multiple hours every day. And so that's kind of what I did. And so that my identity became wrapped up in that to a large degree. I was known as the basketball player, ended up being good. It was the MVP of our league and, traveled and played on AAU teams and all that kind of stuff. But just, and when I look back on that time, as somebody with kids now, I look back and I'm like, man, I'm grateful for it. Obviously I enjoyed it, but I just wasted so much time. I could have been preparing for quote unquote real life in so many more ways. So the Lord ended up drawing me back to himself. I went when I was right before my junior year of high school, went to this Christian camp. My motivations were not pure. I went there because there was going to be girls there, and because actually it was inner city week, ironically. And so there's a bunch of kids who they had bussed up to the Adirondack Mountains from New York City. And so I figured I did some racial profiling and thought, all right, kids from inner city New York, there's going to be lots of, black kids there. I'm imagining that some of them play basketball, so I'll go and I'll play. And the Lord, in his kindness and providence, just worked so that my dad's best friend, who, in spite of my lack of interest in Christianity over that 8-year period, this guy was my dad's best friend, and he was really somebody who the Lord used to minister to me in some pretty profound ways. And so he would go and speak at evangelistic events and bring back, like a hockey puck, for example, for my brothers and I. I couldn't care less about hockey, but this guy, the fact that he was thinking about me, it just always impacted me. So in God's providence, he was preaching the gospel this week. And again, I had, not long before I went, it might've been a year or two, but not super long in the grand scheme of things. My dad tried to get me to read the Bible for a few minutes a day, tried to get me to pray for a few minutes a day. Totally, reasonable thing to do.
Sure.
And I remember looking at him as a 14, 15-year-old and holding up the Bible and saying, this book is stupid. Why would I waste my life with this stupid book? Toss it and then go on my own. To this week at camp, the Lord, he preaches, my dad's best friend preaches. It was like scales fall. All of a sudden, all I wanted to do for the rest of the week was just read the Bible and pray. And just was preposterous. And then from that time on, I was not some sort of perfect person at all, but I did have new desires and a new strength to walk with him. And so then that ended up leading me to go to Bible college, ended up leading me to, I had desires to be a missionary. Once I found out that didn't mean that I had to live in a treehouse, I was thinking to myself, listen, I'm a basketball player. I'm not a treehouse person. But yeah, I ended up getting to the point where that's where I decided, my wife and I both separately decided that's what we want to do, and then ended up getting married and doing just that.
So where you were in Uruguay, is that right?
Yep, Uruguay.
Awesome.
Yep.
So how
not to be confused with Uganda or Paraguay. We get both of those a lot.
Right.
So we ended up basically when my wife and I got married, she still had 1 year of college left. So we got married. I moved to the town where she was living, and she continued her classes. And so I just got any job that I could get. So I ended up working for a bank of all things, which is hilarious. Now that I'm the Bitcoin guy, I used to work for the enemy. And so I was doing that. And then after about a year of being married, she graduated. Our first son was born about a week after she graduated.
Wow.
And then 6 months later, we started raising support to go be missionaries. Basically, we went with an organization that sends teams. And so this organization basically charged the team leader. They appointed the team leader, and then he was kind of tasked with trying to assemble a team. And so we ended up being part of that team. And it was, the Lord was super kind. Uruguay is a very secular place, one of the darkest places in the Western Hemisphere, honestly, in terms of the percentage of evangelicals. It's less than 2%.
Wow.
And so we moved there thinking, "Ooh, I get to make a Westminsterian reference here." I was anticipating being the Tim Keller of Uruguay.
All right.
A very, in some cases, out of touch thing to say these days, but in some camps. But that's what I was anticipating. About 50% of Uruguay is atheist or agnostic. And so we were anticipating going down there. And then once we got there, the surprise was that within a few months of starting the church, more than half of the church were Venezuelan immigrants, and who are just, culturally and just in a whole host of ways could not have been more different than Uruguayans. And so that introduced some, didn't quite rise to the level of animosity of Jew Gentile, but just have a lot of differences. Uruguayans are very European and very just kind of down to earth, low key, not a lot of showiness and just kind of allergic to showiness. Whereas Venezuelans wear bright colors and are very, much more flamboyant and much more vocal. And so we ended up, just seeing the Lord work in that way. But that was kind of my introduction to just this problem of money production. And as I started to just think about currency devaluation and the way that it shapes people, the way that it affects everything from the lives of normal people to ministry. And the way that it's shaped a lot of ministry over the last, basically over thousands of years, but specifically in the American context over the last 75 to 100 years.
Yeah. It's so interesting. You talk about the differences between Uruguay and Venezuela. I'm so American that I have no idea what's going on down in South America at all.
Yep.
So that's fascinating to me, and that, we could talk about all that for a while, but
here, I'll give one. Go Google
Sure.
Operation Condor when you get off here. Operation Condor. Go introduce yourself to what your government did there.
yeah, and I'm sure Venezuela, great test case for inflationary money and all that stuff. So it's a good transition here to my next question, because a lot of our listeners have probably heard of Bitcoin, but they don't know much about it. So can you just give a quick primer on what it is, why it's important?
Yeah. And so just for the sake of the audience, so I've written 2 books, helped write 2 books, one over each one of my shoulders here. I don't know which one's the angel or which one's the demon, but no. So basically the goal of both of these books and the goal of my work for the last 4 years has just been to try to help. This is the tagline for TGFB, is basically to help Christians understand and use Bitcoin for the glory of God and the good of people everywhere. And so basically when you start thinking about Bitcoin, obviously, I'm guessing the average person who's listening to this has heard the name multiple times. It's the crazy magic internet money that they hear about on cable news or something like that, your cable finance channel or something along those lines. And so it's real tempting to just want to dismiss it because of that, right? Or just to only think about it as an investment, a speculative investment. And so the surprise for me, as I started going down this rabbit hole in really early 2019, was that really Bitcoin, before I could even have any kind of framework to think about like Bitcoin itself, I had to think about what money was. And so that was much more interesting as a philosophy major. That was just, trying to answer the question of like, what is money and what makes good money, what makes poor money. All of those questions really, predated Bitcoin and really I could be answered without needing to know anything about Bitcoin. So I kind of, as I was learning about Bitcoin, there was a parallel track where I'm just trying to get my arms around what money is. And there's about as many opinions to answer that question as there are opinions about, theories of the atonement, let's say, for in the context that we're in. So there's tons of opinions, depending on who you are, and again, depending on what your incentives are for answering that question. And so I just did a bunch of work to try to understand what are the various options. And as one of the things, as I was trying to think about money and thinking about Bitcoin, one of the things that stuck out to me was that it was designed to be a scarce. Basically, with Bitcoin, has created the concept of digital scarcity. We all understand that when we go on a website, we go on Google, we do a Google search, we find a picture that we're looking for, we can just copy and paste that picture or save that picture. And we can have effectively unlimited copies of this thing. And so the concept of digital scarcity for a lot of people just seems like a contradiction in terms. But with Bitcoin, the creator basically was impacted by the 2008 financial crisis. And he basically talked about in the correspondences that we have recorded, basically he said, the problem with something to the effect of the problem with the existing monetary system is all of the trust that's required to make it work. And so basically you have governments, because right now our currency units are literally created out of thin air, whether that's, created out of thin air and printed in the form of actual paper units. But actually far more currency units are created through not just the Federal Reserve with the, money go burr, Jerome Powell meme, but also just through the normal banking system, just through the creation and issuance of new loans. That's how money, the vast majority of money is created today. So the question is, that's what money looks like for us now. And that's convenient in a number of ways. If there's an emergency, the government just creates more currency units and issues them out. But that also creates a whole host of not just practical problems, but also ethical problems, right? So, and this is where I started to get interested, was when I started thinking about Bitcoin being created to be a money that a government couldn't create effectively unlimited units of. And the reason why that impacted me was because of the presence of our Venezuelan brothers and sisters. And they had basically a out of control government who, in order to get elected, promised people free stuff. And the way that they paid for those free things once they got elected was by just printing, in their case, Venezuelan bolivares to be able to pay for them. And so as they did that over time, effectively the money became worthless, and it got, just by the dumpster full. People were just throwing it out. It wasn't worth anything. And so I just started to think about Bitcoin in that context. And so as I did more research, I found that this was not what was going on in Venezuela, was nothing new. This has happened for thousands of years, all over the world in different contexts. And so what I realized was that basically fiat currency, currency that's not backed by doesn't take real work. There's not any real scarcity involved. When I say it doesn't take work, think about it. You can take the same bill and put 1 on it or 100 on it. And for some reason, this one is worth 100 times more than this one. It's just crazy. It's totally arbitrary. So that's contrasted with something like silver or gold or other. You could use those. I think they're WAP stone. There's some big stone on the island. So like that, all kinds of things, different things have been used as money. And so all of these things, there's a difference between scarce money and just effectively fiat currency that's not scarce. There's different trade-offs. And the more that I started to think about these things, both through the lens of, just as like, in the context that I was in with Venezuelan people, but then also as a Christian, I started to think about, like, what is money communicating? And I started to realize that the type of money that you have actually communicates a lot about what you believe reality, like the shape of reality is, and the belief and what you believe about the shape and the purpose of things like government. And so the thing that really stuck out to me as I was studying these things, I was still pastoring our small church in Uruguay, had about 50 people in the church, 40 to 50 people. And one day I was doing sermon prep. I was in the book of Galatians. I was near the end. And the Apostle Paul says, God is not mocked. For what a man sows, that will he also reap. And so as I was trying to think about we have largely new believers. How do I unpack this in a way that will make sense to them? And so the thing that came to mind, the rephrasing that came to mind was that God, so Paul is saying that God has so hardwired, he's so hardwired the universe with this principle of sowing and reaping, that to deny it, you can't deny it. It's so obvious. You can't deny it without mocking him. And so I was like, okay, well, that's a cool thesis, but if that's true, then I should see this everywhere. So what are some examples of this? And so then I started to just have verses, just all these, good Bible college student, all these Bible verses are
sword drill.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So they're all flying to mind. And so I started to think of Thessalonians, where the Apostle Paul says, if one isn't willing to work, then neither should he eat. And so Paul is saying there should be a sowing and reaping relationship between food and work. The logic being that food gives you energy to work and serve others. If you're not willing to steward that energy toward the service of others, then you shouldn't eat. And if you do that for long enough, what happens? You die. And so there's a logical relationship between there. Logic itself is premised upon sowing and reaping. If this, then this. There's a logical relationship there. There's a whole host of other things. We could look at the biblical sexual ethic. God has an order for these things. And when you deviate from that order, when you put a cart before the horse, it has tremendous consequences negatively on us and on other people and other generations as well. So I just started going down and just thinking of all these things. And as a good Keller appreciator at that time, one of the things that came to mind was, man, it'd be great if there was some sort of tie between sowing and reaping and in Jesus, right? This is where all of us Westminster appreciators, we come down. And so I just came to the point where I realized, I thought about the difference between how Islam and Christianity thinks about forgiveness of sins. So in Islam, they don't understand why Jesus needed to die on the cross, because Allah can just forgive sins. He can kind of papally declare your sins are forgiven. There doesn't need to be a payment for sins. And that's obviously contrasted with the Christian faith, where the soul that sins must die. And so there has to be a payment for sin. And so we can't just arbitrarily just declare, he chose not to just arbitrarily declare your sins are forgiven. There had to be someone to pay for the sins of the world. And so this is one of these things where it just, there's a sowing and a reaping aspect there. You cannot deviate this without trying to create a world trying to create and inhabit and rule over a world other than the one that God actually made. And so the more that I thought about these things, the more that I really started to see, wow. So this whole thing of trying to create a money that you can create a limitless supply of is actually an incredibly spiritual action, and an incredible, in that case, I would argue, a really demonic, demonic act that we see precedent for in the scriptures, and it's never good. So I'll pause there.
Sure. And that's great. That I love that tie of that sowing and reaping with redemptive history, in terms of there's a payment that needs to be paid for sin. And I've heard you mention before, like tying redemptive history into really why Bitcoin is so great and so useful. Yeah. And you had this great line where you said that God is a cryptographer. Now, for those of our listeners, they might not know what a cryptographer is, so that might need to be explained a little bit. But cool. Can you go through that and explain how that ties together?
Yeah. So again, one of the, just before we get there,
Sure.
again, one of the things you mentioned is there has to be a payment for sin, right? And so one of the things that happened as I started going down this rabbit hole of trying to understand money, that then consequentially led me to, be interested in Bitcoin. The thing that just overwhelmed me was just how many monetary metaphors are used throughout the scriptures. And so there's a real sense in which if you don't have a basic understanding of economics, you really won't understand the logic of salvation, the logic of what God is doing. Like the kingdom of God is an economic kingdom. Like there's an economic element to the kingdom of God. And so that's one aspect. Now, as it relates to cryptography, when a lot of us think about cryptography, we're thinking about this as maybe as like a wartime instrument, a wartime tool. Probably the thing that comes to mind for me, and maybe, again, I don't know what generation of people are listening to this, but there's the movie Code Talkers. Are you familiar with that movie?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So basically during World War II, they're, the Allies are desperate. The Americans are desperate to hide their communications from the Germans. And they were having varying levels of success in doing this. And so somebody had the idea to use the Navajo language, which is just very different than any other language or most other languages. They started using the Navajo language and they started coding their messages in that language, and it ended up being tremendously successful. And so I started thinking about this concept of, because like Bitcoin is built on cryptography. And Bitcoin is built on it's what's called public-private key cryptography. So public key is basically like a username, and a private key is like your password. So we use this all the time. SHA-256 is the encryption standard that Bitcoin uses. It's also the encryption standard that protects things like the nuclear codes. So it's very secure. Contrary to what people say about quantum cryptography, we're still a long way off from that actually being a threat in any real way. But so cryptography is this way that fundamentally allows you to hide a message from some people in order for it to be revealed to a specific group of people. And so in the best cryptography does this in such a way that someone can look at the message and one person can look at the message and have no idea what it's saying. And another person can look at it and see everything, can see and understand the entire message. And so this is how Bitcoin operates. This is how, we communicate. This is how this traffic that we're, for the call that we're recording, is being protected. And so as I started to think about cryptography, and I started to think about the way that Bitcoin works, and I started to think about biblical prophecy. And so there's a real sense in which, you hear Jesus talk, he's praying and he says, Father, I thank you that you've hidden these things. You've hidden these spiritual things from the wise of the world, and you've given and shown them to children. And so this is how prophecy works. Jesus does miracles, and he tells people, don't tell anyone what I did. And so if you come and you think about, if you think about Jesus as this person, this is where Calvin, our Calvinist sympathies become, very concretized here. Because if you have this assumption that Jesus at all times wants every single possible person to hear and understand the gospel, some of the things that Jesus says and does in the New Testament are going to be very confusing for you, because Jesus regularly, again, says things like, don't tell anybody about the miracle that I did. He basically only chooses 12 disciples. He doesn't just go out there and reveal himself to everyone. And so it's very confusing if you have the wrong assumption. And so the more that I've thought about it, I just realized, like, wait a second, like God really is a cryptographer. He, at various points and in various ways, he hides reality, hides truth, hides, meaning from some people, and reveals it to others to whom he's, pleased to do so. And again, he's not owed to reveal this to anyone, because we have chosen sin. We've chosen to reject him, and we've chosen to go our own way. And so just thinking about God in that way, it just, has been a fruitful metaphor and a powerful one to think about the legitimacy of tools like Bitcoin against some people who would see illegitimacy. They would see, Bitcoin is, there's a well-known article that was penned by the Gospel Coalition, I believe Joe Carter in 2017, who penned an article criticizing Bitcoin for a whole host of reasons. And one of them, I believe, was the fact that it was, Bitcoin at that point was being used largely by criminals. There's another guy named Robert Nexley.
Because criminals don't use fiat money, right?
No, not at all. I mean,
they don't use U.S. dollars.
Exactly. So this is what I said. There's a guy named Robert Nexley who's doing great work in many ways. He's basically has a concept and works with something called biblically responsible investing. So basically, he wants to do casuistry to basically have Christians not just dumping their money in and being willing to make money off of whatever, whether it's pornography or strip clubs or whatever. He wants to help Christians be thoughtful about where they're putting their money. But he actually penned an article as well talking about how Bitcoin, I believe, was the closest thing. This is his exact words: the closest thing to blood money we have today. And so I just couldn't help but laugh and think about, well, yeah, I mean, this makes sense, right? Because when we opened up Saddam Hussein's vaults, he had tons of Bitcoin. Oh, no, he had gold in US dollars. And then when we opened Muammar Gaddafi's vaults, he had tons of Bitcoin. Oh, no, wait, he had US dollars and gold. So the idea that the fact that something could be used by criminals would somehow be an indictment of that thing actually ends up indicting even God, because God created people who are then subverted and used for wicked purposes. So we can't just say silly things like that and be consistent. So exactly. Yeah. Yep. Yeah. And so this is where I upset some Bitcoiners. There's some Bitcoiners who are full on that we would refer to them, and I would refer to myself as a Bitcoin maximalist. But there are Bitcoin onlyists who are out there who basically like why own gold, why own silver, why own anything other than Bitcoin? Bitcoin's the fastest horse. And again, I think that there's good reason to think that Bitcoin's going to be Bitcoin's going to do very well relative to all these other things. But what I would say, I wouldn't say that it's an either or. I would just say, again, there's different trade-offs. In the case of investments, there's not good. Well, and again, this is an oversimplification, but there is no good and bad. There's just different trade-offs. And so some of the trade-offs, like with gold, it's a lot of people who see the value proposition of gold. They think, okay, it's tangible. I can touch it. I can hold it. I have it, right? I don't have to think I have it. I don't have to trust anybody. I actually have it. And I would say, yes, like that is true. The problem though is there are certain threat models where gold's tangibility, its physicality actually become a problem. So for example, our Venezuelan brothers and sisters, and which is again, their situation is not unique. There's hundreds of millions of people who are in situations where they're in horrible political turmoil. And so in their case, many of the people who came to Uruguay, they actually walked across the border from Venezuela into Colombia, and then they had to take a bus or take some other form of transportation from there to go to wherever they were going. And so in their case, as they're walking across the border, there were both government sanctioned thieves known as soldiers and just normal common thieves who knew that this whole migration was happening and who knew that people were bringing their valuables with them. And so in their case, something like gold or silver, its physicality becomes a liability and becomes a threat model that basically a threat vector that would allow them to have their wealth taken from them. This is also contrasted with something like a lot of people are like, well, that's why even gold, that's why I don't even mess with gold or silver. I mess with land, right? Real estate is real. It's not going anywhere. And the problem is something like eminent domain exists.
Right.
And, and like the government can at any time pass any kind of laws they want to that basically just gives them, the government can step in and say, we need this for national security. We need whatever. So it's not that they're bad or good. It's that there's different trade-offs. The other thing with the other weakness, if we're going to talk about weaknesses with gold, is that you have to assay it. So you have to know, how do I know that this thing that I think is gold and looks like gold actually is gold and isn't gold on the outside, but something like tungsten in the middle, which has about the same density of gold. The only way to test that truly, but it's not true. They now have machines where you can scan and actually verify, but they're costly. They're not practical to use in everyday commerce. If I was going to pay you a gold or a silver coin, like it's just not convenient to use. And so there's still trust involved there. The reason why we're in the situation we're in the first place with gold and silver is because gold is heavy, gold is physical, and it's very costly relative to its size. And so people were afraid of losing it and afraid of getting it stolen. And so they would put it into banks and then get, tokenized basically slips, paper representatives for the amount of gold that they had. And so that, again, has put us, all these things have weaknesses, all these things have trade-offs. The things that separate Bitcoin are the fact that it is trivially easy to verify whether or not something that someone is trying to pass off to you as Bitcoin is actually real Bitcoin. If the transaction goes through, given the software, it is Bitcoin. If it doesn't, then it's not. And so that's a pretty trivial thing to do. Another thing is just in terms of walking across borders, that kind of thing. With Bitcoin, because it's public-private key, because it's just data or information, I could, if I wanted to hide my public-private keys, I could put them, for example, if you have control over the Westminster website or some portion of the Westminster website, you could designate a 12 pages of the school's website and basically say, all right, I'm going to put one of my private keys into each one of these pages. And then no matter where I am in the world, as long as I can access, WTS, I can access my public-private key. Even in place of that, I could also just memorize either a 12 or a 24-word seed phrase across any border in the world, get to wherever I need to go. I look like fundamentally I have nothing on me. I get to where I'm going. I can buy a phone, or just work, get a phone or have a phone with me, whatever. I can download an application onto that phone, plug in those 12 or 24 words, and I can have all of my money, my Bitcoin this could be hundreds of billions of dollars. And so again, it's a technological advancement that's incredible in 100 ways. The last kind of separation, the last argument that I would give, especially for American Christians, would be I had the privilege to interview. His name was BJ Dichter. He was the spokesperson for the Canadian trucker protest. And so they were, because they were protesting the government and different poke mandates, they were declared enemies of the state. They were cut off from their bank accounts, and so overnight they lost access to any of their money. And so there's a lot of people for whom they think about Bitcoin and they're like, it's dollar denominated price is so volatile. Why would I want to put my money in something that can go down 30% in one day? To which I would reply, yes. But the question is, which is worse, owning something that could go down 30% in one day, or not having any access to something that can only go down, at least on paper, 5% per year, or it's really higher than that. But so basically Bitcoin, the only money that these truckers were able to actually access and use to, at least for a short period of time, be able to pay their bills, was the over $900,000 worth of Bitcoin that was donated and distributed to them and custodied in such a way that it wasn't able to be disintermediated or basically have their access cut off from it by the government. And so for Christians, this is, even if you think that America is fine, right? Even if you think, I could never imagine that happening here on the day after we just saw that the Biden White House was targeting conservative groups and making them go through audits and all kinds of stuff. It doesn't take, even if you just totally like America's the greatest, you can still imagine this from a missional context, right? The gospel is going into places that don't allow what's called the SWIFT system, which is the U.S. banking system. A lot of the Middle East doesn't have SWIFT access because they don't want to allow funding of terrorism. In meantime, I have acquaintances who live in the Middle East who work and are doing Christian work in the Middle East. And the way that their missions organizations send them money is by sending them Bitcoin. And then they go out into the market and just a peer-to-peer marketplace. There's like Telegram groups and Signal groups where there are constantly people looking to escape from their rapidly devaluing currencies and move in and out of the local currency into Bitcoin in order to try to preserve their wealth. Because while Bitcoin is more volatile for now than the dollar, it still is far less volatile than I would say dozens of currencies around the world. Yeah. So those are a number of reasons. We could go into a whole host more. But.
Sure. And it's so the next question I have is kind of about the spendability of it, if that's the proper terminology. I remember one time I was at a libertarian festival over the summer, and there was a coffee shop that was let you pay and anything from US dollars to goldbacks, Ethereum, Bitcoin, 9mm bullets.
Let's go. Okay.
Anything like that. But that seems like that's a bit of an oddity. It was fun.
Yeah.
to be able to spend that way. But not everywhere. You're probably not going to be able to go to a Starbucks and buy something in Bitcoin. So how does that work? And what is the sort of the mechanisms in place to be able to use it as a currency and not
Yes.
just an asset?
I love it. Okay, and so this is one of my favorite. I get to talk about one of my other favorite, just like metaphors for thinking about money. Because again, the last 5 years of my life has just been trying to think about like what is money? How do I think about money? What is the correct mental models to use to think about this? Because there are a ton of mental models, and many of them are incomplete and just aren't helpful. And so one of the assumptions that people have in answering this question of what is money is they initially think about, as they think about Bitcoin, they're like, well, Bitcoin's not really money because it's not accepted everywhere, right? Like I can't go anywhere and spend it. To which I would cheekily reply, is Jesus Lord? And they will go, well, yes. And I'm like, well, Jesus is not Lord, though. His lordship is not being acknowledged everywhere in the world right now. Does that mean he's not Lord? And so people start to look at me weird, and or just start to think about it. They're like, oh, okay. And so this is where I would say, yeah. So Bitcoin is money, right? We're gonna go spiritual metaphor. Jesus is Lord. Okay, he's becoming Lord. Like his lordship is being recognized more and more, and there will come a day in which Jesus's lordship will be recognized everywhere. With Bitcoin, without comparing the relative importance of these two things at all, like Bitcoin is money. Like Bitcoin is able to be used, whether or not any individual person does it, it's actually able to be used. There's no reason why anyone on earth can't use Bitcoin. In terms of anybody who has internet access can use Bitcoin. Bitcoin is becoming money. Okay, it's becoming something that more and more people are willing to give and receive for their labor, their time, or other goods like homes or cars or anything like this. And then the day is coming when this adoption takes time. This maturity takes time, and so maturity actually brings me to my favorite metaphor for how to think about these things. Because again, if we're thinking about Bitcoin's existed for 16 years now. Bitcoin's a teenager. Bitcoin just got its driver's license, right? It's still we're still very early, right? Everyone, we look at the price denominated in dollars, and we're like, a Bitcoin's $108,144 as of right now. Man, I've totally missed this thing. It's so expensive already, and still less than 0.25% of global wealth is in Bitcoin. Like it's just staggering. And so Bitcoin is still very immature. Now, the same could be said of a baby. Now, and so we're going to ask a related question. So is Bitcoin money is a very tangential question to, is a baby a human? Is a baby a person? And so we would all of us pro-life people would go, well, yes, of course a baby is a person. And then I would say, but wait a second. When I read Genesis 1 and 2, okay, God lays out three things that people are to do, right? And he says, be fruitful, multiply, and fill the earth. He says, exercise dominion, and I can't remember what the other half of that is, dominion and something else, exercise that out in the world. And then he says, guard and keep the garden. Okay, so these are three components to what it means to be human. Can a baby do any one of those three things? No, he can't. Does that make him not a human? No, it just makes him a baby. It makes him less mature than he's going to be at some point. And so this is kind of the story with Bitcoin. Bitcoin is a child. And so in the same way that the fact that Bitcoin is not accepted everywhere doesn't mean, that it's not money. The fact that a baby can't do everything that an adult can do doesn't mean that it's not a human. And so as a baby grows up, he gets to the point where he can be fruitful, multiply, and he can do some of these other things that God has called people to do. But okay, so this is where the turn happens. So for a lot of people, what they're waiting for is Bitcoin to get to the point where it's not volatile anymore. And they want Bitcoin to get to the point where it's fully mature. And then they say, okay, and then we'll hop on board, and then I'll buy some. And it's like, okay, you can choose to do that, but you have to think about the fact that, again, if you compare that to people, you have people who, what is the purpose for having kids? There's a whole host of them, but historically, one of the reasons, this is not the only, but one of the reasons why you would have kids is to be able to protect you in your old age. right? That you want kids, obviously, as Christians, we want kids who will then go out and do the work of God in the world. We want them to serve the Lord. But part of this is that we want them to protect us. Okay. We want them to help provide for us when we're too old to provide for ourselves. Now, if you never have kids, if you don't have kids before you need kids, you won't have kids. And so something very similar is true of Bitcoin. Like if your plan is to wait for some arbitrary point in the future before getting Bitcoin, you could do it, but you're not going to be able to reap the benefit to anywhere near the same degree as you would if you were starting to try to understand and then buy some Bitcoin right now before it's reached mass adoption. Because once you reach mass adoption, it will still be a good money. It will still be a stable source of value and all this kind of stuff. But we're still a long way from that happening. And yet everything that we're seeing is telling us that that's the direction that it's going, from nations buying it, from talk of a strategic Bitcoin reserve from the largest nation that's ever existed. We have countries like China. We have countries like Russia are using Bitcoin in exchange to buy things like oil. I mean, there's just the level of news that's flooding in on a daily basis about states adopting a Bitcoin treasury and all these other humongous, sovereign wealth funds buying Bitcoin. Like in my mind, it makes no sense for of all people, Christians who God has called to take godly, calculated risk, to continue to ignore Bitcoin at this point.
Mm. And you mentioned nations getting in on the Bitcoin phenomenon, but there's also this sort of parallel or maybe coinciding phenomenon of the central bank digital currencies, the CBDCs. Correct. And it seems like the governments are kind of looking over the shoulder of Bitcoin and saying, "Hey, that's pretty cool. Can we
the Mr. Bean meme? Yeah.
yeah. Can we do something like that?" And it seems like a recipe for a disaster. And as the Bitcoiners always say, it's not your keys, it's not your coins.
Yep.
And a CBDC doesn't even pretend to be your coins. It's the government's coins that they are, bequeathing to you.
Yes.
So how can Bitcoin serve as a hedge against the CBDCs?
Yeah. So again, for those who aren't familiar, a CBDC is just a central bank digital currency. So it's just really, it's a digital form of money, which in reality, we've had a digital form of money. We have digital dollars now. Mm-hmm. The vast majority of us only operate in digital dollars. When you use your credit card to pay online, you're using digital dollars. So the question is not if we're going to use digital currency, which we already have that. The question is what separates a CBDC from the current digital money that we have. And the thing that separates it is basically with a central bank digital currency, a government or a central bank can basically establish the parameters. Basically, they can program specific details for this currency. They can do whatever they want to. So, for example, they could say, "Hey, again, you could have corporate collusion. Let's say we had some corporate. We never have that right now, but sure. Let's say it's some crazy dystopia. We actually had some collusion between public-private things, and let's say you had a government basically say, "Hey, again, this I don't really think this would happen, but like let's say you can only we're going to give you this money. We're going to airdrop. So something like COVID happens, right?" Mm-hmm. COVID happens. And they're like, government's like, all right, we're going to airdrop you $500 per person in the central bank digital currency. What that means is we're going to give you this money, but the only places that you can use this money is on food. Okay. And then also on top of that, we're going to give you this money. You can only spend it on food and you have to spend it within 30 days. And so they could, again, there's lots of talk with AI about about humans being replaced and, then just humans just getting like a stipend every so often from the government or whatever. When you start to think about, wait a second, we're talking about governments can put shot clocks on money. They could say, hey, we don't, that group over there at Westminster, they're an extremist group. Like they have a totally barbarian sexual ethic that they believe in over there. They're a bunch of haters. So we're not going to allow money. We're not going to allow the United States central bank digital currency to be used to pay tuition at Westminster Theological Seminary. And so it's difficult to imagine the United States getting to this place on one level. Depending on what has happened in different elections, maybe it wouldn't have been as difficult to imagine. Yeah. But again, as Christians, you should be thinking about other places around the world. We care about the spread of the gospel. And so there are places where these kind of things already exist. So in China, this already exists right now. They can put a shot clock on money. They can prevent you from giving money to certain entities if you're using the system, which they mandate that you do. And so central bank digital currencies are a nightmare in a lot of ways. They are the complete opposite of Bitcoin, which doesn't require any permission, which is a totally open and trustless network. And so with Bitcoin, I don't have to ask anyone. I don't have to ask permission from anybody to open a Bitcoin wallet, to request payment in Bitcoin. It's all just totally open source code. Anybody can download, anybody can use it. And you may be thinking to yourself, well, yeah, sure. I mean, that sounds super nice. But if a government were to come after you and try to shut down Bitcoin, I mean, it would be trivial, right? Yeah, no. China has tried to ban Bitcoin 7 times in the last 16 years, leading to one of the reminded me of one of the single worst pieces of marketing propaganda I've ever seen. I was a basketball fan back in the day. Dwayne Wade once had a basketball shoe, I believe, with Nike. It's either Nike or Converse. And so the shoe, the marketing, it drew from a proverb. It said, "Fall down 7 times, get up 8." To which, if you think about that for 2 seconds, you're like, wait, no, it would only be get up 7 times. And so they've tried to ban Bitcoin 7 times, and they've failed 7 times because they can't enforce the ban. Bitcoin, it's just open source code that anybody can use. It's not like there's one place where you can, like one website where you can get the Bitcoin. You can have anybody send you Bitcoin from anywhere in the world to anywhere in the world, as long as you have internet. And even there's ways to do it without internet. You can send Bitcoin transactions over ham radio. There's all kinds of incredible stuff being done right now. So those are the differences between the two. One is just totally top-down controlled, hermetically sealed. You're doomed. Total Foucaultian panopticon, contrasted with Bitcoin, which is just totally open. For better or for worse, you can send money anywhere in the world, and no one can stop you.
So and then another thing that I've been thinking, we're in America, in the West, it seems like we kind of have some of the telltale signs of, society in decline.
Wait, you're telling me this for the first time?
Right. Yeah. It's obvious on the face at this point, but, a lot of that obviously has to do with inflation. We used to have the $5 footlong and the McDonald's dollar menu. And we used to have 24-hour Walmarts. Those are gone. Can't go to those anymore.
Used to have 5-cent gasoline, to quote our grandparents.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. I'm just talking about within my living memory, let alone, we could expand that infinitely. But there's also other stuff that seems to not necessarily be inflationary or inflation related, although, maybe it is in some ways. But, it seems like people are kind of less impressive. Institutions are less capable and dependable. So how can sound money and Bitcoin specifically help and reverse that trend?
Yeah. So it's great timing to have this conversation. So again, don't look the gift horse article in the mouth. Maybe Eric Prince of Blackwater fame wrote this article yesterday, along with some other guy, where he just talked about the unexpected. Again, I was like, is Eric reading over my shoulder? Is he like, listening to my phone calls? Because these are all conversations that we've been having for the last 3 or 4 years. But he just talked about how because everything within society is downstream from money. Like money is it's the circulatory system in many ways. One of the circulatory systems, I guess you can't have more than one. It's one of the necessary vital systems through which our body politic, on which it operates. And so when you do something to mess with that circulatory system, you start to change a whole bunch of the incentives for how the system works. And so we look at in the news right now, we have the SNAP benefits scheduled to expire because of the government shutdown. It's going to expire tomorrow. And so there's 40 million American families who every month are cutting a check from the government and using that to pay for their needs. And so what has that done? You have 40 million households who are reliant on the government. Now, why can the government do that? Because they are the ones creating the money and printing it out of thin air. That would be contrasted if we had, back when the United States and every other country on earth and every other civilization that you'd ever want to be a part of, all of them the greatest civilizations have always started with scarce currencies. with what's called sound money. So you start with something that's scarce, like especially silver and gold. There's a reason it's called the gold standard. The characteristics that gold has have made it uniquely good for being money, especially money to base a civilization on, a nation on. And so where you have sound money, where you have a monetary standard that can't be altered by the government, it provides at least one thing in society that the government can't change. It's one thing that basically is above the government, if you will. It's one thing that they have to bow to, they have to acknowledge, and like factor that in when they're going to make their policies. And so basically the difference is fiat currencies, especially paper or digital fiat currencies, effectively make governments and central banks gods. They give them godlike power where they can, like, anything that they want. It's kind of like at the Tower of Babel, where God says anything that they want to do, will not be impossible for them. It's basically, we've seen the same exact thing with fiat currencies. And so this in central banking and fiat currencies, and this is something that I really have just a passion to help Christians see this. I'm writing this pamphlet with a buddy who's a missionary in the Middle East. And so we're working on just this very short pamphlet, just making the argument that if you look at the spread of Christianity if you look at the spread of Christianity since the beginning, and especially since you had the concept of something like a world reserve currency, which is really like the last 400 years, basically whoever has had the world reserve currency, they have much more economic power. And it just so happens that all of the last people who've held the world reserve currency have been Christian dominant countries. And so whoever holds the world reserve currency is by definition and by necessary consequence the largest missionary outputter in the entire world. The largest. They're able to print more. They're able to plant more churches. They're able to build more and do more good things for the poor. They're able to do a whole bunch more things. And all of this comes down to the fact that their currency has more purchasing power by virtue of having more demand than any other one in the world. And so what we observe is that, again, if the reason why, like, basically currencies are will fulfillment technologies. Okay. If you have money is a will fulfillment technology. It allows you to say, let my kingdom come and let my will be done on earth. And if possible, if I could, even in heaven. And so we see this all the time. And so why is it that the United States is able to send hundreds of millions of dollars to Africa to fund African abortions? Why is it possible to fund trans and LGBT education around the world? Is this because there's tremendous demand in those places for this education, and there's tons of? No, it's because the government is literally they're running deficits and they're printing money out of thin air to basically fund and to expand their vision of what they would like, of how they would like the world to operate. And so this what you believe about money has tremendous, and what your civilization instantiates and puts into law as money, it has tremendous downstream impact for what the country is able to do and what the leaders are able to do and the type of reality they're able to subsidize around the world. So I'm kind of just like desperate to help Christians think about this and think about the role of technology in helping bring evil to an end, or just basically limit the power of evil. The place where I can frequently go is to the Reformation with the printing press. You have the printing press. Before this, there'd been other people who were making the same cases that Luther was, but Luther hit the right time where the printing press existed, where there was enough incentives from other people to fund the printing that was going on, to expand their resources and to spread them all across Europe and all across other parts of the world. And so God used a timely message with a timely tool to advance his kingdom and advance his gospel in ways that weren't in ways that were being limited, and in ways that were oppressing the poor and just normal people who wanted to know and worship God. I would just make the case, you can look around. If you look at, if you really just started to take an inventory of all that has been done and that's been possible because of the advent of fiat currency, and just basically giving governments blank checks to do whatever they want to. It is truly staggering. And so Bitcoin represents one tool in the tool belt. It's not some sort of panacea, but it represents one tool in the tool belt to basically help not just move money into places where it's currently difficult to move, which is good for immigrants, which is good for missions organizations, which is good for a whole bunch of groups of people. But it's also, for the average person to be able to hold a money that is not able to be devalued at the drop of a hat by a government. And this is the reality, is that when COVID happened, in that first year, I think it was either 2020 or 2021, when President Trump and then President Biden sent out those checks, 80% of all the dollars that ever existed were created in that time period. And so when you just think about the numbers involved, so why did house prices go up so much? Was it because the house became fundamentally better over that period? No, there just was way more currency units out there competing for more or less the same amount of houses. And so that just led to, the only way for that to work, solution to work itself out was just for the prices to increase. And so this is something that just devastates ministry all over the world. It devastates things like higher education. And so my passion and goal, and part of the work that we're doing, is just trying to basically work with Christian organizations who are most heavily reliant on donations. A lot of churches are heavily reliant on donations, and as inflation happens and as currency debasement happens, the people who are donating have less resources to donate. And so this is something that we've observed over and over again for hundreds of years. We can observe this phenomenon. And so my goal is to help Christians understand, that this is happening, why it's happening, and then to look for, ways to opt out of, having this theft happen to you, the theft of your purchasing power happen, whether it's in gold or whether it's in the case the case that I make most frequently it's with Bitcoin. So that's kind of the passion. No matter where it is, obviously there's people who are, orgs that are receiving stock donations, that are receiving donations of buildings. There's things along those. I don't denigrate or look down on any of those things. But I do think that Bitcoin is a unique tool that has advantages and trade-offs that those things do not have, that will be increasingly important, that are important today, and that are going to be increasingly important as we continue to go on. If we're concerned with continue to advance the gospel through stuff both at home and abroad, in a whole host of different ways.
Yeah. And how can churches be a part of that vision? How can they utilize Bitcoin to do these things?
Yep. And so the easiest thing would just be to enable your congregations to give in Bitcoin. And so that could be as easy or as complicated as you're interested in having it be. There's a number of like Bitcoin companies where you can just sign up for an account with them, and the accounts are effectively free. And so most people are familiar with Coinbase. I don't recommend them. And the reason is, especially as a Christian, because the way that Coinbase makes money is they basically, the reason why they sell 10,000 cryptocurrencies is not because or actually more probably, is not because they actually believe in them. It's because they make a small spread every time someone buys or sells any one of these currencies. So they'll look at all these currencies that they know are garbage, know are worthless, and they'll be like, well, who are we? Who are we to judge? We're willing to take 1 or 2% off of every single one of these trades, and so they're saying yes to hundreds of millions of dollars every year by willingly and knowingly selling their customers garbage. On the other hand, there's other organizations or other businesses that only sell Bitcoin. And so you may disagree with their thesis that Bitcoin is the only thing that matters, but what you can't disagree with is that they are leaving hundreds of millions of dollars on the table by not selling these other things that they don't believe in. So it's just a demonstrable way to see that these are at least not as bad actors as they possibly could be. Right. So companies in that space are River. River's the one that we recommend. There's another one called Swan. There's some other ones that are out there. But and so what you can do, if you're a church, you can just create an account with one of these things. And then I think most of those, all the ones that I know of, will have like a QR code feature. You can just throw the QR code on your website and just enable people to give that way. And then you can just, again, rather than, for a lot of people, buying Bitcoin as with the church's funds is like, people are just terrified to do that, because like, again, you only have so much credibility capital with if you're a pastor. You only have so much credibility with your people, and really you don't want to put it all on the line for magic internet money. Like I don't begrudge anybody that.
Sure.
But if you want to hold on to Bitcoin that people in your congregation donate, I think that's the least objectable, easiest, path of least resistance way to start accumulating Bitcoin. You could also, there's more complicated ways. You could mine it. You could do a whole bunch of other things depending on who you have in your congregation. But that would be one thing that I'd be doing if I was in ministry. And as I have conversations with pastors, it's like, do you have somebody in your church who actually understands and cares about these things and would be willing maybe to dedicate some time to either just providing education or to just doing the work themselves? There's one of the verses that comes to mind is those who are strong have an obligation to bear with the failings of the weak and not to please themselves. And so I think like Bitcoin is complicated. It's complicated to understand. And so we need Christians who do understand it to be willing to devote time to helping other people come along, especially the ministries that they care about, to understand it and figure out how to navigate those waters.
Awesome. Well, that's pretty much all I have. I have one thing, which we can talk about it. I might end up cutting it from from this, but
let's go.
Because last time we talked, it was on the Thank God for Bitcoin podcast.
Yep.
That was awesome. And then listeners, if you're still listening, if I haven't cut this part out of the podcast, you should go listen to that as well. But I had talked about. I'm interested in the Austrian theory of the business cycle and Austrian economics. And one time I was down in the dungeon of the basement at Westminster, and I found Van Til's personal copy of Ludwig von Mises's Human Action.
Oh man, so jealous.
Yeah, and I've since we last talked, I've read through a bit of his Marginalia, and it's really interesting stuff because he's kind of to sort of step back and look at how the Reformed community has kind of viewed economics, from the early 1900s on. I was looking through. I had another project that I was thinking through. It was Torch and Trumpet, which is it was a magazine or a newspaper from the CRCNA back in the stuff I was looking at was from the 19 teens. And they had an economist who was an economist professor at Calvin College. And he was kind of hoodwinked by Keynes. So he was sort of a Keynesian. And it's so funny. I was sort of cracking myself up as I was reflecting. I'm reading these 100 plus year old articles and going, "No, you idiot." I'm like, this guy's been dead for 60 years or something. But they sort of, as you read through these, you get to the 1930s, the 40s, they start to see what's going on in the Soviet Union. And Ludwig von Mises, his price calculation problem becomes more widespread. So they kind of pivot from quoting Keynes to quoting Mises.
Let's go.
And so that's an unbelievable step up.
I know. Yeah.
But then, so I'm sure Van Til, he's kind of reading, okay, let's check this Mises guy out. And in the early pages of the of Human Action in the Marginalia, Van Til hates it.
Oh no!
He hates it in the early pages.
Yeah.
And it's because, he's looking at Mises, and Mises is, his defining category, his foundational principle is man acts.
Yep.
Right. And so Van Til goes, that's it.
Yeah.
There's nothing below that.
It's incomplete. Come on.
And so he's kind of like, and Mises uses lots of evolutionary stuff.
Yes.
And so Van Til, he's just kind of like, oh, like this is no good. And then as you go through,
let's go,
you get to the descriptive stuff. He's like, yeah, this is obvious.
Yep.
Misesian economics is great. The Misesian metaphysic is a little bit lacking. So
yes.
And I think that you see that through with Rothbard and Hayek and all of these Austrian guys. A lot of them are sort of secular atheistic people. Rothbard's foundational stuff is all natural law, which Van Til is not going to like. And so
exactly. Yep.
But you have this strange thing where their descriptive stuff is just rock solid, but it's not self-consciously tied into the bedrock of the self-disclosure of the Trinitarian God of the Bible.
Exactly. And so that's where my passion.
Yeah.
So I'm working on a book. I've been working on a book for a while, like that is kind of trying to piece together more of like I would say it's like it's Austrian economics meets James B. Jordan meets Bitcoin. Basically, it's kind
awesome.
of this book isn't going to touch on Bitcoin exactly, but it's kind of goes into more just basically. I mean, I make the case from sowing and reaping of like this is something that God has designed the world to operate according to. Keynesian economics totally denies that, like just totally. Sets that aside and acts like man is God, and so again have big problems there. It does remind me the one Christian voice in that world was Gary North, or one of the more well known, who unfortunately was no fan of Bitcoin.
Really?
You can hop on his website and read through. He's got a bunch of Bitcoin articles. I've read some of them. Just so disappointing. Like the reasoning is so poor. It just it's so bad. And so we when we wrote this book, Thank God for Bitcoin, we reached out to, basically it was based off of we basically popularized Gary North's book Honest Money. And then synthesized and popularized Honest Money, and then the other book is called The Ethics of Money Production by an Austrian economist named Jörg Guido Holzmann, who's a Roman Catholic guy, not a Pope appreciator. So that was interesting. I'm like, you're not far from Protestantism, sir. And so we really appreciate his book. He unpacks the work of a 15th century monk bishop named Bishop Nicholas Oresme, who was objecting to one of the princes. I can't remember. I want to say France, but I could be wrong. He was objecting to the fact that the prince was just putting baser metals into the monetary supply to be able to effectively money print, create more currency units than previously existed. And he just basically said, in short, sir, you're violating this very arbitrary, this very obscure Old Testament passage known as the Eighth Commandment. You're stealing. Like, this is stealing and it's wrong. So
stealing and lying at the same time.
100%. So we wrote our book, just kind of unpacking these things, and we reached out to, because we were so appreciative for Honest Money. We can't. Oresme is not around anymore, so we couldn't ask him, and so we just reached out to Gary North and asked him if he'd write the foreword for our book. We received a scathing reply of like, not if you paid me. And so then to this day, when he went to be with the Lord a couple of years ago, I have people who come up to me and they ask me, you wrote this book and based it on Gary North's book. Was Gary North a Bitcoin fan? And I said, I can frequently say he is now. So I just think this is an issue and a topic that is just ripe for the picking for reform people, for people who care about big ideas and the way that they impact the world. You really can't find. I mean, there's the scholarly piece, a bunch of scholarly pieces and books that can be written about the impact on central banking, on the effect that it's had on faith, and I just think there's lots of fruitful work out there for those who are interested.
Yeah. And I'm not qualified to write this book, but I have a whole outline for a book that I would love to see written that probably nobody will write unless I do it. And it would basically be just trying to take these, Mises and Rothbard and Hoppe and their amazing descriptive work and just rooting it down deeper. And it's so easy because human action, man acts. Well, why does man act? Because he's created in the image of a God who acts. It's that simple.
It is
to tie it down. So and even Hoppe, I think last time that we talked about Hoppe. His argumentation ethics is essentially just a Van Tillian argument for capitalism. He says that if you're having a conversation, if you're having an argument, then you've already agreed that force is not a suitable mind changer.
Exactly.
So to argue against it is to contradict yourself, because you've already acknowledged by arguing that force is
exactly.
Is not
Exactly. And this gets at what it means to be human. Like this is the surprising thing of, when you start to try to answer what is money, you eventually get down to, wait, what does it mean to be human? Right? Because money it's a teleological tool. It's created with the purpose in mind, and tools are designed to be wielded by people. And it has to fit the hand, right? If it doesn't fit the hand, it's not gonna serve people. And so, I really think that there's there's just lots of just stuff of work to be done to just kind of unpack, the way that these things relate and the downstream consequences. It's been thrilling for me. I mean, my problem is I just have too many. There's just too many things. There's too many things that are interesting that I'm, want to work on. Both there's like, pragmatic, and that's not the best word, but there's just like, hey, the harvest is ripe, and so there's things, there's just the education work of helping people understand Bitcoin. But the inner nerd in me is just like, oh man, I just want to disappear for like 4 months and just write this book, and that's just about a theological grounding for value and money, and so we need more. To quote the article that blew my mind, that you gave me from Machen, right? Near the end, I believe the last part of the quote, he says, praise God for the Christian economists. Basically something to the effect of, may God bless their labors and give us more of them, or something along those lines. So please, Westminsterians, come, let's go.
Well, I'm going to be encouraging people to explore that.
Love it.
And people maybe smarter than me. So
love it. Let's do it. And again, I'd love to just pick your brain offline. There's, again, just a framework. I wrote a piece on my own blog that's I edited it, and then it's getting published by the Theopolis Institute. Are you familiar with them?
Sounds familiar.
Yeah. So again, sure. Bitcoin guy being published by Theopolis, that will probably, some people listening to this will be like, yeah, that checks out. Bunch of weirdos over there. And there's others who are like, wait, what? And so it's a biblical theological treatment, looking at the most famous biblical passage about taxes. So the render to Caesar passages, and what is and isn't going on there. So that's a part of the other, the book that I'm working on is just kind of unpacking, what is money, who created money. And my contention is that money is a divine creation, in the same way that the logic of marriage. With marriage, God says, marriage is based on Christ and the church, which preexisted it. We look at the fatherhood of God. Fatherhood is based on, the Father from whom every family in heaven and earth is named. There's this eternal pre-existing thing that is the framework for the physical thing. My contention is that the same thing is true of money. There's an eternal, thing of store value and all these things. And so the way that man of God, there's specific things in mind that God has in mind for money, and for what he desires that it communicates. And so again, hopefully I'll get that done, and then we can come back and chat about it.
Well, I love, there's this interpretation of that passage when he says, bring me a denarii. And, prior they were threatening to riot if the Romans brought in the golden eagle. But he says, hey, bring me a denarii. Whose image is on this? You have a golden idol on the Temple Mount. Isn't that strange?
And they had one readily available to give to him, right?
Yeah. It's right here. It's right here on the Temple Mount, this little golden image of Caesar.
Yeah, exactly. And so there's just some really interesting things. I mean, there's maybe I'll share you the link with my blog piece. So the way that my blog works is much more, it's much more like free flowing. It's not written like in a scholarly way. It's kind of written more for fun, complete with some memes and some stuff. But I just think there's a lot of details that are there that is just easy to miss, because most of us, we come with an agenda, right? We come with an agenda. When we think about that passage, we think about, this is about paying taxes. And a lot of people will just be like, this just means that we blindly pay whatever taxes come down the pike, thus saith the Lord. And it just pains me, because I'm like, that is eisegesis of the level 34 Thetan level. Just it's so bad, given what's actually said there and what Jesus is actually trying to do. So, appreciate you, Brandon. Been a long time since we talked, but appreciate you, and again the work that you're doing there. And again, we would love to help Westminster both start saving a Bitcoin, and also again, just maybe get like a Bitcoin endowment. This is something else I'm working with a few different schools on. Just finding people who understand it or would want to donate, and have this be the foundation for an endowment that could fund generations of students in the future. So
that would be incredible.
I'll
maybe try to connect you with some people to have those conversations, and then hopefully we can have more conversations here on the Westminster Podcast. And before we sign off, where can we find you? Where can we find Thank God for Bitcoin and the great work that you're doing there?
Yeah. So you can, the place where I'm most active is just Twitter. I refuse to call it by its new name. So just Twitter. My handle is at @JMBush, WRITES. That's my BUSH. So that's my handle there. If you want it, I'll give it to this crowd. If you want to shoot me an email, if you guys have questions or anything, my email is the letter J @tgfb.com. Would love to chat. Again, very, very passionate about what you guys are doing. Grateful. I'm not a seminarian. I graduated from merely with my bachelor's from a Bible college.
That's all right.
North of you in Pennsylvania.
Yep.
But yeah, just great. I really appreciate what you're doing and would love to chat more in the future.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Jordan.
Yep.
This is the Westminster Podcast. Thanks for listening. Hope you enjoyed this episode of the Westminster Podcast. Before we wrap, I wanted to make a quick announcement. If you enjoyed this conversation and were inspired by it to consider ways to utilize Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies to support the work of the gospel, I'm glad to announce that Westminster now accepts Bitcoin, Ethereum, and most major coins and tokens. This is a great way to donate and support Westminster's mission to train specialists in the Bible to proclaim the whole counsel of God for Christ and his global church. You avoid capital gains tax, you receive a tax deduction for the full fair market value, and Westminster receives 100% of the value of your donation. If you want to know more about how to go about making such a donation, please visit wts.edu/donate to get in touch with our stewardship representatives. Thank you. This has been a podcast of Westminster Media. Westminster Media is a ministry of Westminster Theological Seminary. If you would like to join us in our mission to train specialists in the Bible to proclaim the whole counsel of God for Christ and his global church, please visit www.wts.edu/donate. This podcast was hosted by McLean Smith and edited by McLean Smith.